In 1956, a geoscientist for Shell and professor at Stanford projected that global oil production would peak around the year 2000. This came as a huge shock at a time when oil was driving more and more of the economy. Some people thought it would mean a global financial crisis, and others, a full-on apocalypse. Since then, predictions about peak oil have popped up again and again. Supply problems were supposed to start in 2011, with effects noticeable by 2015. There was talk of high prices for food and fuel, supposed to impact agriculture and electricity. But none of this ever happened. The supply problems that everyone freaked out about never came. So what did happen? And should we be worried about running out of oil? First, looking at this question now is completely different from decades ago, because there have been huge changes in our lives. In the early 2000s, we weren't really thinking about life without fossil fuels. Electric vehicles were nearly unheard of. So an end of our oil supplies seemed like an existential crisis for the planet. With growing awareness of climate change, renewables have taken off, and the amount of them in the mix has grown hugely. It's now cheaper to generate electricity from solar and wind than from fossil fuels. There's also way more attention on electric vehicles. 14% of new vehicles sold globally in 2022 were electric, compared to just 5% in 2020. Even the United States and China, two huge polluters, are making hefty investments into green technology. And something pretty special happened in 2023.
When we're looking at renewables investment, which clearly has been growing rapidly, and in 2022 met that from fossil fuel, and 2023 far exceeded it.
Mike Coffin used to work for BP and now researches how markets align with climate policy.
And clearly that gap is only set to widen.
While not much would move without fossil fuels, and oil in particular, the future of renewables is looking brighter and brighter. And that has made the end of oil take on a whole new meaning.
If you go back to, say, about 15 to 20 years back, there was a concern that oil supply is going to peak. We're going to run out of oil.
Atul Arya is an engineer and Standard & Poor's chief energy strategist.
Now the concern is somewhat different, which is that we're going to hit a peak or a plateau in demand.
This is a really huge shift. In October 2023, the International Energy Agency published a report predicting the end of oil and other fossil fuels. Only this time, the end is a peak in demand, not supply, and it's predicted to come in 2030. High demand and low supply means a high price. Low demand and high supply means a low price. Oil executives around the world were up in arms over the report. Because less demand with the same amount of supply would mean falling prices for fossil fuels and less profit for the industry. This is a big deal since demand for oil has been growing every year except 2020 when COVID hit. This wouldn't mean that we wouldn't use fossil fuels anymore, rather that it would become much harder to justify new fossil fuel projects. Because our supply of fossil fuels is doing great.
We're not running out of oil and probably not going to run out of oil. Based on the current reserves, we have about 40 years of oil.
And that doesn't even count all the new planned projects. This is mostly thanks to a newish technology called hydraulic fracturing or fracking. Fracking is a process that involves injecting a slushy of water and chemicals into rock, creating tons of tiny cracks. This allows oil and gas to escape and be collected at the surface. The wastewater is then often injected deep underground, which can contaminate the local environment and cause earthquakes. Fracking took off in the United States in the early 2000s, and the country now produces more oil per year than any other nation in the world, so much that it's affecting other countries.
Take Saudi Arabia or UAE or Kuwait, and actually right now, because of so much oversupply in the market, they are producing a lot less than what they can produce.
So on the one hand, we might have an oversupply of oil, and on the other, plateauing demand. Also, investors turning away from fossil fuels. But oil companies are used to expanding, and major oil producers like Shell, Exxon, and Total Energies are all still betting on rising demand.
Data suggested that all companies, I think except maybe BP, were increasing their oil production.
Faye Holder is the lead researcher on a report that investigated oil companies' communication and claims.
Total Energies stated it was forecast to spend 25% of its capex for 2022 in renewables and electricity. But when you look at what that includes, it also includes some kind of gas-fired power.
They may seem like they're shifting towards renewables, but they are actually still banking on a fossil fuel future.
The business operations aren't changing particularly or at the pace needed. They're also lobbying against policies that would force that change or bring it about quicker, but at the same time promoting this very public narrative that they are doing all they can.
State-owned oil companies like Russian Rosneft and Saudi Aramco are also betting on future money from fossil fuels, even though projects approved now may never be profitable. New sites take years to build up infrastructure and to get ready for drilling. In financial terms, they might become stranded assets, something that was invested in but became obsolete.
For some countries, 30 to 40% of entire fiscal budget could be at risk as the transition unfolds and oil prices fall. That's going to have a massive impact on the economies of these countries and crucially on living standards for those in these countries.
And that impact could also hit individual citizens directly. Many pension funds around the world are invested in oil and gas. If these companies fail spectacularly, millions of people could be plunged into financial insecurity in their old age. So faced with the end of oil, it seems like investing in renewables is the smart financial decision. They're cheaper, and there's less risk of new projects becoming stranded and unprofitable in the future.
So all of that is going to help us move away from oil, but it's not going to be overnight.
Because according to all predictions, we're going to continue to need fossil fuels for a while. They're used as a backup power when wind and solar aren't running, and widespread nuclear isn't likely to come online in time. Transport and energy storage also need to improve for us to be able to quit them entirely. But the more investment goes in, the more renewables improve, and we desperately need that to keep existing on this planet. But we are on the way. It's no longer a question of if, but when. Instead of being concerned about an end to our oil supply, we should be worried about pumping too much of it. With falling demand and a world shifting to renewables, it's not a smart decision, either financially or for our life on this planet. For more solutions-focused stories, subscribe to our channel. We have new videos for you every Friday.